Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Section I, the creation. The absolute creation. Risher Whitey, the head part, beginning, of a thing, in point of time Genesis 10 verse 10, or value Proverbs 1 verse 7. Its opposite is Achre Youth Isaiah 46 verse 10. Risher Youth, in the beginning, is always used in reference to time. Here only is it taken absolutely. Create, give being to something new. It always has God for its subject. Its object may be anything, matter Genesis 1 verse 1, animal life Genesis 1 verse 21, spiritual life Genesis 1 verse 27. Hence, creation is not confined to a single point of time. Whenever anything absolutely new, that is, not involved in anything previously extant, is called into existence, there is creation numbers 1630. Anything or event may also be said to be created by him, who created the whole system of nature to which it belongs Malachi 2 verse 10. The verb in its simple form occurs 48 times, of which 11 are in Genesis, 14 in the whole Pentateuch, and 21 in Isaiah, and always in one sense. Elohim, God. The noun, Eloah or Eloah is found in the Hebrew Scriptures 57 times in the singular, of which 2 are in Deuteronomy, and 41 in the book of Job, and about 3,000 times in the plural, of which 17 are in Job. The Chaldeform Elah occurs about 74 times in the singular, and 10 in the plural. The Hebrew letter, H, is proved to be radical, not only by bearing mappic, but also by keeping its ground before a formative ending. The Arabic verb, with the same radicals, seems rather to borrow from it than to lend the meaning colluit, worshipped, which it sometimes has. The root probably means to be lasting, binding, firm, strong. Hence, the noun means the everlasting, and in the plural, the eternal powers. It is correctly rendered God, the name of the eternal and supreme being in our language, which perhaps originally meant Lord or ruler. And, like this, it is a common or appellative noun. This is evinced by its direct use and indirect applications. Its direct use is either proper or improper, according to the object to which it is applied. Every instance of its proper use manifestly determines its meaning to be the eternal, the Almighty, who is himself without beginning, and has within himself the power of causing other things, personal and impersonal, to be, and on this event is the sole object of reverence and primary obedience to his intelligent creation. Its improper use arose from the lapse of man into false notions of the object of worship. Many real or imaginary beings came to be regarded as possessed of the attributes, and therefore entitled to the reverence belonging to deity, and were in consequence called gods by their mistaken votaries, and by others who had occasion to speak of them. This usage at once proves it to be a common noun, and corroborates its proper meaning. When thus employed, however, it immediately loses most of its inherent grandeur, and sometimes dwindles down to the bare notion of the supernatural or the extramundane. In this manner it seems to be applied by the witch of Endor to the unexpected apparition that presented itself to her 1 Samuel 28 verse 13. Its indirect applications point with equal steadiness to this primary and fundamental meaning. Thus, it is employed in a relative and well-defined sense to denote one appointed of God to stand in a certain divine relation to another. This relation is that of authoritative revealer or administrator of the will of God. Thus, we are told John 10 verse 34 that, he called them gods, to whom the word of God came. Thus, Moses became related to Aaron as God to his prophet Exodus 4 verse 16, and to Pharaoh as God to his creature Exodus 7 verse 1. Accordingly, in Psalm 82 verse 6, we find this principle generalized, I had said, gods are ye, and sons of the highest all of you. Here the divine authority vested in Moses is expressly recognized in those who sit in Moses' seat as judges for God. They exercised a function of God among the people, and so were in God's stead to them. Man, indeed, was originally adapted for ruling, being made in the image of God, and commanded to have dominion over the inferior creatures. The parent also is instead of God in some respect to his children, and the sovereign holds the relation of patriarch to his subjects. Still, however, we are not fully warranted in translating Elohim, Judges, in Exodus 21 verse 6, Exodus 22 verses 7 to 8, Exodus 22 verse 27, Hebrew versification, 8, 9, 28, because a more easy, exact, and impressive sense is obtained from the proper rendering. The word meleke, angel, as a relative or official term, is sometimes applied to a person of the Godhead, but the process is not reversed. The Septuagint indeed translates Elohim in several instances by alpha gamma gamma epsilon lambda omicron iota angeloi Psalm 8 verse 6, Psalm 97 verse 7, Psalm 138 verse 1. The correctness of this is seemingly supported by the quotations in Hebrews 1 verse 6 and Hebrews 2 verse 7. These, however, do not imply that the renderings are absolutely correct, but only sufficiently so for the purpose of the writer. And it is evident they are so, because the original is a highly imaginative figure, by which a class is conceived to exist, of which in reality only one of the kind is or can be. Now the Septuagint, either imagining, from the occasional application of the official term angel to God, that the angelic office somehow or sometimes involved the divine nature, or viewing some of the false gods of the pagan as really angels, and therefore seemingly wishing to give a literal turn to the figure, substituted the word alpha gamma gamma epsilon lambda omicron iota angeloi as an interpretation for Elohim. This free translation was sufficient for the purpose of the inspired author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, inasmuch as the worship of all angels Hebrews 1 verse 6 in the Septuagintal sense of the term was that of the highest rank of dignitaries under God, and the argument in the latter passage Hebrews 2 verse 7 turns not on the words, "Thou madest him a little lower than the angels," but upon the sentence, "Thou hast put all things under his feet." Moreover, the Septuagint is by no means consistent in this rendering of the word in similar passages, see Psalm 82 verse 1, Psalm 97 verse 1, 1 Samuel 28 verse 13. With regard to the use of the word, it is to be observed that the plural of the Chaldee form is uniformly plural in sense. The English version of Bar Elohim, the Son of God, Daniel 3 verse 25 is the only exception to this. But since it is the phrase of a pagan, the real meaning may be, a son of the gods. On the contrary, the plural of the Hebrew form is generally employed to denote the one God. The singular form, when applied to the true God, is naturally suggested by the prominent thought of his being the only one. The plural, when so applied, is generally accompanied with singular conjuncts, and conveys the predominant conception of a plurality in the one God, a plurality which must be perfectly consistent with his being the only possible one of his kind. The explanations of this use of the plural, namely, that it is a relic of polytheism, that it indicates the association of the angels with the one God in a common or collective appellation, and that it expresses the multiplicity of attributes subsisting in him, are not satisfactory. All we can say is, that it indicates such a plurality in the only one God as makes his nature complete and creation possible. Such a plurality in unity must have dawned upon the mind of Adam. It is afterward, we conceive, definitely revealed in the doctrine of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Shamayim, skies, heavens, being the high, Shamai, be high, Arabic, or the Eri region, the overarching dome of space, with all its revolving orbs. Eretz, land, earth, the low or the hard. The underlying surface of land. The verb is in the perfect form, denoting a completed act. The adverbial note of time, in the beginning, determines it to belong to the past. To suit our idiom it may, therefore, be strictly rendered, had created. The skies and the land are the universe divided into its two natural parts by an earthly spectator. The absolute beginning of time, and the creation of all things, mutually determine each other. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1 verse 1. This great introductory sentence of the Book of God is equal in weight to the whole of its subsequent communications concerning the kingdom of nature. Genesis 1 verse 1 assumes the existence of God, for it is he who in the beginning creates. It assumes his eternity, for he is before all things, and since nothing comes from nothing, he himself must have always been. It implies his omnipotence, for he creates the universe of things. It implies his absolute freedom, for he begins a new course of action. It implies his infinite wisdom, for a kappa omicron sigma mu omicron cosmos, an order of matter and mind, can only come from a being of absolute intelligence. It implies his essential goodness, for the sole, eternal, almighty, all-wise, and all-sufficient being has no reason, no motive, and no capacity for evil. It presumes him to be beyond all limit of time and place, since he is before all time and place. It asserts the creation of the heavens and the earth, that is, of the universe of mind and matter. This creating is the omnipotent act of giving existence to things which before had no existence. This is the first great mystery of things, as the end is the second. Natural science observes things as they are, when they have already laid hold of existence. It ascends into the past as far as observation will reach, and penetrates into the future as far as experience will guide. But it does not touch the beginning or the end. This first sentence of Revelation, however, records the beginning. At the same time it involves the progressive development of what is begun, and so contains within its bosom the whole of what is revealed in the Book of God. It is thus historical of the beginning, and prophetical of the whole of time. It is, therefore, equivalent to all the rest of Revelation taken together, which merely records the evolutions of one sphere of creation, and nearly and more nearly anticipates the end of present things. This sentence Genesis 1 verse 1 assumes the being of God, and asserts the beginning of things. Hence, it intimates that the existence of God is more immediately patent to the reason of man than the creation of the universe. And this is agreeable to the philosophy of things, for the existence of God is a necessary and eternal truth, more and more self-evident to the intellect as it rises to maturity. But the beginning of things is, by its very nature, a contingent event, which once was not and then came to be contingent on the free will of the eternal, and, therefore, not evident to reason itself, but made known to the understanding by testimony in the reality of things. This sentence is the testimony, and the actual world in us and around us is the reality. Faith takes account of the one, observation of the other. It bears on the very face of it the indication that it was written by man, and for it divides all things into the heavens and the earth. Such a division evidently suits those only who are inhabitants of the earth. Accordingly, this sentence Genesis 1 verse 1 is the foundation stone of the history, not of the universe at large, of the sun, of any other planet, but of the earth, and of man its rational inhabitant. The primeval event which it records may be far distant, in point of time, from the next event in such a history, as the earth may have existed myriads of ages, and undergone many vicissitudes in its condition, before it became the home of the human race. And, for aught we know, the history of other planets, even of the solar system, may yet be unwritten, because there has been as yet no rational inhabitant to compose or peruse the record. We have no intimation of the interval of time that elapsed between the beginning of things narrated in this prefatory sentence and that state of things which is announced in the following verse, Genesis 1 verse 2. With no less clearness, however, does it show that it was dictated by superhuman knowledge. For it records the beginning of things of which natural science can take no cognizance. Man observes certain laws of nature, and, guided by these, may trace the current of physical events backward and forward, but without being able to fix any limit to the course of nature in either direction. And not only this sentence, but the main part of this and the following chapter communicates events that occurred before man made his appearance on the stage of things, and therefore before he could either witness or record them. And in harmony with all this, the whole volume is proved by the topics chosen, the revelations made, the views entertained, the ends contemplated, and the means of information possessed, to be derived from a higher source than man. This simple sentence Genesis 1 verse 1 denies atheism, for it assumes the being of God. It denies polytheism, and, among its various forms, the doctrine of two eternal principles, the one good and the other evil, for it confesses the one eternal Creator. It denies materialism, for it asserts the creation of matter. It denies pantheism, for it assumes the existence of God before all things, and apart from them. It denies fatalism, for it involves the freedom of the eternal being. It indicates the relative superiority, in point of magnitude, of the heavens to the earth, by giving the former the first place in the order of words. It is thus in accordance with the first elements of astronomical science. It is therefore pregnant with physical and metaphysical, with ethical and theological instruction for the first man, for the predecessors and contemporaries of Moses, and for all the succeeding generations of mankind. This verse forms an integral part of the narrative, and not a mere heading as some have imagined. This is abundantly evident from the following reasons. 1. It has the form of a narrative, not of a superscription. 2. The conjunctive particle connects the second verse with it, which could not be if it were a heading. 3. The very next sentence speaks of the earth as already in existence, and therefore its creation must be recorded in the first verse. 4. In the first verse the heavens take precedence of the earth. But in the following verses all things, even the sun, moon, and stars seem to be but appendages to the earth. Thus, if it were a heading, it would not correspond with the narrative. 5. If the first verse belongs to the narrative, order pervades the whole recital, whereas, if it is a heading, the most hopeless confusion enters. Light is called into being before the sun, moon, and stars. The earth takes precedence of the heavenly luminaries. The stars, which are coordinate with the sun, and preordinate to the moon, occupy the third place in the narrative of their manifestation. For any or all of these reasons it is obvious that the first verse forms a part of the narrative. As soon as it is settled that the narrative begins in the first verse, another question comes up for determination, namely, whether the heavens here mean the heavenly bodies that circle in their courses through the realms of space, or the mere space itself which they occupy with their perambulations. It is manifest that the heavens here denote the heavenly orbs themselves, the celestial mansions with their existing inhabitants, for the following cogent reasons. 1. Creation implies something created, and not mere space, which is nothing, and cannot be said to be created. 2. Since the earth here obviously means the substance of the planet we inhabit, so, by parity of reason, the heavens must mean the substance of the celestial luminaries, the heavenly hosts of stars and spirits. 3. The heavens are placed before the earth, and therefore must mean that reality which is greater than the earth, for if they meant space, and nothing real, they ought not to be before the earth. 4. The heavens are actually mentioned in the verse, and therefore must mean a real thing, for if they meant nothing at all, they ought not to be mentioned. 5. The heavens must denote the heavenly realities, because this imparts a rational order to the whole chapter, whereas an unaccountable derangement appears if the sun, moon, and stars do not come into existence till the fourth day, though the sun is the center of light and the measurer of the daily period. For any or all of these reasons, it is undeniable that the heavens in the first verse mean the fixed and planetary orbs of space, and, consequently, that these uncounted tenants of the skies, along with our own planet, are all declared to be in existence before the commencement of the 6 days' creation. Hence, it appears that the first verse records an event antecedent to those described in the subsequent verses. This is the absolute and aboriginal creation of the heavens and all that in them is, and of the earth in its primeval state. The former includes all those resplendent spheres which are spread before the wondering eye of man, as well as those hosts of planets and of spiritual and angelic beings which are beyond the range of his natural vision. This brings a simple, unforced meaning out of the whole chapter, and discloses a beauty and a harmony in the narrative which no other interpretation can afford. In this way the subsequent verses reveal a new effort of creative power, by which the pre-Adamic earth, in the condition in which it appears in the second verse, is prepared for the residence of a fresh animal creation, including the human race. The process is represented as it would appear to primeval man in his infantile simplicity, with whom his own position would naturally be the fixed point to which everything else was to be referred.